The shocking outburst. The atmosphere in the wedding hall was full of excitement. The guests were dressed in their finest clothes, chatting and laughing, waiting for the big moment. The bride, Emma, stood at the back of the room, ready to walk down the aisle. Her heart was racing with excitement, and she couldn't wait to marry the love of her life, Jake. The beautiful white dress she wore shimmered under the soft lights, and she felt like a princess. Jake, standing at the altar, was nervously adjusting his tie. He couldn't believe that the day he'd been waiting for was finally here. His friends were gathered around him, chatting happily, but Jake was distracted. His thoughts were on Emma, his beautiful bride. He had never been so sure about anything in his life. Emma was the one for him, and he couldn't wait to spend the rest of his life with her. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a loud voice cut through the air. "Don't marry him." The voice was high-pitched, full of emotion, and it echoed through the hall. Everyone turned to look in the direction of the sound, their eyes wide with confusion. The person who had shouted was a young boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old. He was standing at the back of the hall, his small face red with emotion, his eyes wide with fear. The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the boy, unsure of what was happening. The bride, Emma, froze. Her heart skipped a beat. What was going on? Who was this child? And why was he yelling? The boy pointed directly at Jake. "He has a secret family," he shouted again, his voice shaking with intensity. "Don't marry him. He's lying to you." Gasps filled the room. Emma's face turned pale. She looked at the boy, then back at Jake, unsure of what to think. Was this a prank? Why would a little boy say such things at a wedding? The guests were whispering among themselves, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jake's heart raced. He turned to the boy, his face filled with shock and confusion. "Stop it," Jake said, trying to calm the situation. His voice cracked, and he took a step toward the boy. "That's not true, okay? Stop saying these things." But the boy wasn't backing down. "I saw him," he cried out. "He has another family. I saw him with a woman and kids. He's lying to you, lady." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the boy, then at Jake, her heart beating faster. Could this be true? Could Jake really have another family? The thought was impossible. She had known him for so long. They had been through so much together. He had never mentioned anything like this. He had never hinted at having a wife or children. Jake tried to keep his composure, but his mind was racing. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him. He knew that all eyes were now on him. They were waiting for him to explain, but he didn't know what to say. How could he explain something so ridiculous? "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake said, his voice trembling. "This is crazy. I don't have a secret family. I've never been married before. I'm not lying to anyone." The boy's eyes didn't soften. "You're lying. I saw you. You have a wife and kids," he shouted. The boy's voice was full of conviction, and it was impossible to ignore. Emma felt her knees go weak. Was it possible that Jake had been hiding something so big from her? How could he have kept something like that a secret? "Tommy, please," a woman's voice called from the back of the room. The woman walked forward, looking calm and composed. She was clearly trying to take control of the situation. "Tommy, you need to stop this." But Tommy, the little boy, didn't stop. "He's lying. I saw him. Don't marry him." His words echoed in the hall, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked around at the guests, who were now staring at her. She could feel the weight of their gazes. Some people were whispering. Some were trying to look away. But everyone was thinking the same thing. What was going on? Emma turned to Jake, her heart racing. "Is it true?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough for him to hear. She felt a lump in her throat, and for the first time, she felt the uncertainty that she had never felt before in their relationship. She wanted to trust him, But the little boy's words had shaken her to the core. Jake's face was pale now, and his hands were trembling. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control of his emotions. "Emma," he began, his voice low, "I swear to you, there is no secret family." This boy is confused. But Tommy wasn't convinced. He shook his head, his face full of determination. "I'm not confused. I saw it. You can't hide the truth." Emma felt a chill run through her body. The weight of the situation was too much for her to bear. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of her life, but instead, it had turned into a nightmare. What was she supposed to believe now? As the tension in the room grew, Emma stood frozen, torn between the man she loved and the shocking accusations that had just been made. Was Jake really hiding a secret, or was this just a child's misunderstanding? There was only one way to find out, but would she be able to handle the truth? The room remained silent, the guests waiting for what would happen next. The drama had only just begun, and the shocking truth was about to be uncovered. Uncovering the truth. The tension in the room was palpable. Every guest, whether close friends or distant relatives, was now looking at the scene with a mix of confusion, disbelief, and growing curiosity. The wedding that was supposed to be a celebration had suddenly turned into something much more complicated. Emma stood frozen, her heart racing as the little boy's words replayed in her mind. He has a secret family. Jake's face was pale, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had no idea where this had come from, but he couldn't deny the fact that the eyes of everyone in the room were fixed on him. It felt as though the walls were closing in. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart, but it wasn't working. Nothing was making sense. The little boy, Tommy, stood firm. His small figure seemed determined, like he was not going to back down no matter what anyone said. He was pointing his tiny finger directly at Jake, unwavering in his conviction. "I saw him," Tommy shouted again, causing several guests to exchange nervous glances. "He has a family, a wife and kids." Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been through so much with Jake over the years, and now with the boy's accusations, it felt like the ground was slipping out from under her feet. Could it be true? Could Jake have been hiding this from her all along? Her mind raced. She thought back to all the conversations they'd had, all the plans they'd made for their future. She had always believed in Jake. She had trusted him completely. But now, doubt was creeping in. She glanced at Jake, searching his face for any sign of guilt, any hint that might reveal the truth. Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He reached out to Emma, his voice shaking as he spoke. "Emma, please, I swear to you, I don't have a secret family. I've never been married before, and I've certainly never had kids." But Emma's eyes were filled with doubt. She glanced at Tommy again, her thoughts torn. Was this boy really just confused, or had Jake been lying to her all this time? Before Emma could respond, the woman who had been calling Tommy earlier stepped forward. She was older, perhaps in her 40s, with a calm and collected demeanor. She looked at Jake and Emma, then at the boy, her expression serious. "Tommy," she said softly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You need to stop this. It's not true." Her voice was firm, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. She didn't seem entirely convinced herself, but she was trying to control the situation. Tommy shook his head defiantly, not allowing himself to be silenced. "I saw him. He was with a woman and kids. They're his family," he cried out, his voice rising with emotion. The room was in complete silence now. All eyes were on Jake, waiting for him to explain himself. This was a moment that would define his relationship with Emma, a moment that would either strengthen their bond or tear it apart. The truth had to come out. There was no running away from it. Emma turned to face Jake fully, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed answers. "Jake," she said, her voice quiet but filled with the urgency of the moment. "Please, tell me the truth. Is this true? Do you have a family? A wife? Kids?" Jake's stomach twisted in knots. He had never expected his life to unravel like this, not in a million years. He looked into Emma's eyes, his heart heavy with the weight of the moment. He had to make her believe him. He had to make her understand. "No, Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swear to you, I don't have another family. I've never been married before, and I've never had kids. This is all some kind of mistake." Emma's eyes filled with tears, the hurt and confusion written all over her face. "Then why is he saying these things? Why would he accuse you of something so serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake didn't have an immediate answer. The weight of the situation was pressing down on him. He didn't know why Tommy was saying these things, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to prove his innocence. He couldn't let this lie destroy everything he had with Emma. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. It was the woman who had been trying to calm Tommy. "Look," she said, her voice firm. "There's been some misunderstanding. Tommy has a vivid imagination, but he's not making this up. I know where he saw Jake, and I'll explain everything." Emma's eyes widened as the woman's words caught her attention. "You know where Tommy saw Jake?" she asked, her heart racing. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The woman nodded, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. "Yes, but it's not as simple as it seems," she began, her voice steady but full of mystery. "I think there's something bigger at play here, something none of us expected." Jake felt his stomach churn. What was this woman talking about? What was going on? The room was silent once more, the guests hanging on every word. What was going to happen next? Would the truth finally come out, or was this just the beginning of a much deeper mystery? As the woman took a deep breath, the tension in the room grew even more intense. Emma looked at Jake one last time, searching for any sign that he might be hiding the truth. The next few moments would change everything. The truth comes crashing down. The silence in the room was almost suffocating. Everyone's attention was fixed on the woman who had spoken up, and their collective curiosity seemed to hang in the air. What did she mean by something bigger at play? And why did it feel like the truth was just out of reach, like there was more to this than anyone could see? Jake felt his heart racing. His palms were sweaty, and his mind was spinning. What could this woman possibly know about him? He had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a simple mistake. Someone, somewhere, had put all of this into motion. He could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure mounting on him and Emma as they waited for the next twist in this shocking turn of events. The woman, still standing in front of Tommy, took a deep breath. She looked around the room, her eyes briefly meeting Jake's before turning to Emma. "I know this is all very confusing," she said, her voice calm yet filled with a certain urgency. "But the truth is, Tommy didn't just see anything out of the blue. He saw something he wasn't supposed to." Emma's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What was Tommy not supposed to see?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration and fear. She needed to know. Everything depended on it. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing over at Tommy, who was still clutching her hand tightly. "You see," she continued, her voice growing softer, "Tommy has been around for a while. His parents are close to someone in Jake's past. A family he thought was gone. A family that he thought had moved away." Jake's confusion deepened. What family? What past? The woman met Jake's gaze again, this time with a touch of sympathy. "Jake, you don't know this, but your past is a little more complicated than you think. You weren't just seeing things, Tommy." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. "Jake has a child, a son, and a woman who's been looking for him for a long time." The words hit Jake like a tidal wave. His heart skipped a beat, and his mouth went dry. "What?" Emma looked at him, disbelief clouding her eyes. "Jake, is this true? Do you have a child? Another family?" she asked, her voice shaking. She could hardly believe it, but the growing doubt in her heart made it hard to deny. Jake's mind raced, but the pieces weren't falling into place. He had no idea what this woman was talking about. He had never had a child. He had never been married. Yet somehow, all of this was unraveling, and he had no explanation for it. "No, Emma, I swear, I don't," Jake pleaded, his voice desperate. "I don't have any children. I've never been married. There's no family, no one looking for me. I don't know what she's talking about." But the woman's expression remained unchanged, as if she had seen this story play out before. She nodded slowly. "I believe you, Jake. I really do. But there's someone else who doesn't." At this point, the entire room was on edge, and everyone's eyes were on the woman. Her words were heavy with significance, and the sense of mystery was overwhelming. "I think you need to hear the rest of the story," the woman continued. "Tommy didn't just make up these things. He's been hearing stories about you from someone very close to him. And when he saw you today, it all came rushing back." Jake's thoughts were a blur. He wanted to protest, to deny everything, but something deep down inside him told him that he wasn't being given the whole truth. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the woman's words made sense. He couldn't keep denying something that seemed to have been brewing for so long. "But why now? Why today?" Jake asked, his voice almost pleading for answers. The woman took a step closer. "Because the person who's been searching for you is here. Right now. And they've been waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. This wedding, this day, it's all connected. Everything is coming to a head." Jake's heart sank. The woman's words were starting to make him feel like he was trapped in a nightmare. He had always been careful, always made sure his past stayed in the past. But now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. Emma, still looking at Jake, could see the fear in his eyes. "Jake, tell me the truth. Is there someone out there? A woman? A child? Is this all real?" Jake looked at Emma, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say, Emma. I've never had a family. I've never been married. But somehow, all of this, it's happening. I swear, I've never known any of this before today." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she realized that the man she loved might not be the person she thought he was. Was Jake hiding something from her? Or was he telling the truth? And the world had turned against him in the most unexpected way. The woman looked at both of them. "You both deserve to know the truth. And soon, you will. The person who's been looking for Jake isn't far. And when they finally reveal themselves, everything will change. What happens next will shock you." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know who this person was or what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. The truth, whatever it was about to come crashing down. The family's arrival. The room felt colder now, the weight of the woman's words settling over everyone like a thick, heavy fog. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, his mind racing to find a logical explanation for everything that was happening. But nothing made sense. Every answer he gave seemed to raise more questions. Who was this mysterious family? Why hadn't he ever heard of them before? And why today? Why had everything seemed so normal just moments ago, and now felt like it was falling apart? The woman stepped back, her eyes scanning the room with a knowing look. She didn't seem surprised by the shock she'd caused. She'd obviously seen this kind of reaction before. It was clear that she was leading everyone towards something, and Jake couldn't help but feel that something big, something life-changing, was about to unfold. Tommy was still holding his mother's hand, his eyes wide with curiosity and confusion. It was obvious that he didn't fully understand the depth of what had just been revealed, but the tension in the room was palpable. His innocent accusations had shattered the peace of the wedding day, and no one knew what to expect next. "Don't worry, Tommy," the woman said softly, kneeling down to his level. "You did the right thing. Sometimes, when things seem too strange to believe, it's because there's something real hiding behind them." Tommy nodded, Though his confusion didn't seem to lift, his innocent eyes flicked between Jake and Emma, as if he were waiting for them to explain everything. Jake felt the weight of those eyes, and for the first time, he realized how much Tommy had inadvertently uncovered. Tommy wasn't just a child speaking nonsense. He was someone who had seen a piece of a larger puzzle, a piece that Jake wasn't even aware existed. Emma's gaze was fixed on Jake, her eyes searching for answers. She had trusted him. She had loved him. But now, as the mystery deepened, she felt something inside her shift. Doubt. The feeling of betrayal, though unspoken, hung in the air. "Jake, I need you to tell me everything." "Please," Emma whispered, her voice a mix of hurt and confusion. Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? He had never known of a secret family. He had never been part of any hidden past. And yet now he was trapped in a situation where nothing seemed clear. He didn't know who he could trust anymore, except for Emma. But even now, the look of uncertainty in her eyes made him question everything. Before Jake could respond, the doors to the hall creaked open. Everyone turned as two figures stepped inside, their faces hidden in the shadows at first. They looked familiar, yet Jake couldn't place them. They were older, their features somewhat obscured by the dim light, but as they stepped further into the room, their identities became unmistakable. "Is this the moment you've been waiting for, Jake?" the woman from earlier asked, her voice almost mocking now. "It's time. The family is here." Jake's breath caught in his throat. The figures in front of him were not just random strangers. They were his past that he had buried long ago. The man who stepped forward had a stern expression, his eyes locked on Jake with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. He was tall, with dark, weathered features that made Jake feel a sudden, strange connection. "Dad." Jake's voice was barely a whisper, the word escaping before he could stop it. The man didn't respond, but his eyes softened for just a moment, before the stern expression returned. He seemed to study Jake, as though trying to figure out if the man standing before him was truly the son he had once known. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a cold, measured distance. Behind him stood a woman, her long dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She had the same sharp features as the man, and for a split second, Jake could have sworn she was looking at him with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Jake," the woman said, her voice cool but steady. "We've been waiting a long time for this moment." Jake's mind spun. He couldn't process what was happening. Was this really his family? The family he had never known. He hadn't seen his father in years, not since he left when Jake was a teenager. And the woman, could she be his sister? The realization was hitting him like a ton of bricks, and he didn't know how to react. Emma stepped forward, her voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and caution. "Who are you? What do you want with Jake?" The woman's gaze flickered to Emma before settling back on Jake. "We've been looking for you for years, Jake," she said. "And now, we finally found you. Your past is not as simple as you thought." Jake looked at the woman, his mind racing. What past? What had they been hiding from him all these years? "You've been living a lie, Jake," the man said, his voice low and firm. "Everything you thought you knew about your life, it's all about to change." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. The truth, whatever it was finally coming to light, and what he would learn in the coming moments would shake everything he thought he knew about himself to the core. But before he could ask another question, the woman continued, "Your real family is here, Jake, and we've got a lot to talk about." The suspense in the air was suffocating. There was no turning back now. Jake had to face the truth, whatever it was. Secrets unveiled. Jake's head was spinning. The room felt like it was closing in on him. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of his life that were being torn apart. Everything that had seemed so certain just hours ago. The wedding, the joy, the excitement, had suddenly crumbled into a confusing pile of questions. His father, the man he hadn't seen in years, stood before him now. And the woman beside him, his sister perhaps. Jake couldn't process it. It felt like a bad dream, one that he couldn't wake up from. Emma stood by his side, her hand clutching his tightly. He could feel the tremor in her fingers, her uncertainty reflecting his own. The shock in her eyes mirrored his. What was happening? Who were these people? And why were they showing up now, at the worst possible time? The silence was thick, suffocating. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath, waiting for someone to speak. But Jake couldn't bring himself to say anything. His throat was tight, and the words that had once been so easy to say were now impossible to form. Finally, it was the woman who had arrived with Jake's father who spoke again. "Jake," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we've waited a long time for this. It's time you knew the truth about your past. All the pieces are about to fall into place." Jake shook his head, still in disbelief. What truth? He had always thought his life was simple. He had grown up with his mother, had a decent job, and had managed to create a life for himself. He hadn't known there was a secret family. But now, standing in front of him, was proof that everything he had known was a lie. "What are you talking about?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What truth? Why are you here?" The man, Jake's father, looked at him with a mixture of regret and resolve. He stepped forward slowly, his gaze never leaving Jake. "You were part of a family once," he said, "a family that we've been forced to hide. Your mother didn't want you to know the truth. And for years we respected that. But now things have changed, and it's time for you to learn everything." The words hit Jake like a slap to the face. He had never known any of this. His mother had never mentioned a family, never even hinted at the idea that there was more to his life than what he had been told. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jake demanded, his voice rising with frustration. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you come back for me?" The woman stepped forward, her expression softening. "Jake, it wasn't your fault. Your father had to leave for reasons you wouldn't understand. It was never about you. But now we need to make up for lost time." Lost time. How could he make up for years of abandonment? How could anyone? "But why now?" Jake asked, his voice shaky. "Why are you showing up now, on the day of my wedding? What does this have to do with my life?" The father's eyes flickered with something that Jake couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe. But it was gone in an instant. "Because your past is catching up with you, Jake. We didn't have a choice. We've been watching you, waiting for the right time to bring you back into the fold. The truth is, there are things about your family, about your heritage, that you need to understand. And now, it's time for you to face those truths." Jake felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. He had never known any of this. His entire world, everything he had built for himself, was now being questioned by strangers who claimed to be his family. It was too much to take in at once. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening. Emma squeezed his hand tighter, her voice barely audible. "Jake, what are they talking about? What are they saying?" Jake didn't know how to answer her. He didn't know what any of it meant, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. The woman continued, her tone now softer, almost sympathetic. "Jake, you've always had a place with us. You just didn't know it. And now we have to make sure you're ready for the responsibility that comes with being part of this family." Responsibility. What could they mean by that? Jake's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. He had never asked for this. He hadn't wanted to be part of some hidden family, with secrets he couldn't even begin to understand. "We'll explain everything," the father said, his voice steady but filled with a weight Jake couldn't ignore. "But first, you need to hear the full story, the truth about why we left, and why we're back now." Jake's heart was pounding. He was standing at the edge of something huge, something life-altering. The answers he had been looking for, answers to questions he didn't even know he had, were within his grasp, but with them came a truth that would shatter everything he had ever known about himself. He looked at Emma, her face filled with confusion and worry, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everything: his past, his family, his future, and whether he was ready or not, it was time to face the truth. But as the silence stretched between them, Jake couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to uncover, so much more to understand. And the answers were going to change everything. He took a deep breath, ready for whatever was about to come next. There was no turning back now. The hidden past unfolds. Jake's mind was spinning. Every word, every revelation from the last few minutes felt like a whirlwind, and he could hardly keep up. His father and the woman who claimed to be his sister were standing in front of him, waiting for him to process what had just been said. But how could he? This wasn't a conversation he had ever prepared for. His wedding day, the day that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration, had been turned upside down by these strangers who were now claiming to be part of his life. The silence in the room was thick, the tension palpable. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes darted between Emma, who was still standing beside him, her face a mixture of confusion and concern, and the strangers in front of him. His father, the man who had abandoned him as a child, had just dropped a bombshell, and Jake was struggling to process it all. He couldn't take it anymore. "Why didn't you tell me about all of this before?" Jake finally asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "Why now? Why ruin my life today of all days?" His father took a slow, deep breath before replying. "Jake, we didn't want to complicate things. But the truth is, your life was never meant to be the way it is. There's a bigger picture here, something you've never known, something you need to understand." Jake shook his head in disbelief. He couldn't fathom what his father was talking about. How could his life be anything other than what he had always known? He grew up with his mother, worked hard, and had built a life for himself. What could they possibly know that would change everything? "Everything you've been told about your past is wrong," the woman, his sister, said softly. "Your mother kept secrets, big secrets, and we've been waiting for the right time to tell you everything." Jake could feel the anger bubbling up inside him. How could they do this to him? How could they keep such a huge part of his life hidden? But there was a part of him that wanted to hear what they had to say, wanted to know the truth, even if it was hard to swallow. His father continued, his voice calm yet filled with an undercurrent of urgency. "There's a reason we stayed away. There's a reason we couldn't be a part of your life, Jake. But now, you need to know why." Jake took a step back, his mind racing. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" The woman looked at him with pity in her eyes. "Your mother wasn't just a single woman raising you on her own. She had a life before you were born. A life that she kept hidden from you. A life that's now come back to haunt us." Jake's blood ran cold. What was she talking about? His mother had always told him that his father had left when he was just a baby. He had never known anything different. So what could they possibly mean by a life before him? "Your mother was part of a secret organization," his father revealed, his voice growing more serious. "A group that had connections to powerful people. We tried to keep you away from that life, Jake. We didn't want you involved, not until you were ready. But now it's time." Jake's world felt like it was shattering before his eyes. What organization? What powerful people? His mother, the woman he had always trusted, had been hiding these secrets from him his entire life. How could she keep something so huge from him? "But why didn't you tell me?" Jake asked again, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you come back for me? Why leave me alone with only her to raise me?" His father's face softened, but there was an undeniable sadness in his eyes. "We couldn't, Jake. We couldn't risk you being involved in the danger we were facing. You were better off living a normal life, away from all of this. But now that you're here, we have to face the consequences. They're coming for us." Jake's mind was spinning. He had so many questions. His life had been a lie. His mother, the woman he had always trusted, had kept him in the dark about everything. And now, these strangers, his father and sister, were saying that he had a part to play in something far bigger than he could ever imagine. "We never wanted this for you," his father said, his voice filled with regret. "But now you're part of this world. You have a role to play in this. It's your legacy, Jake. You can't turn your back on it. There are people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. And you're the key." Jake was numb. This was too much to take in. The world he had known, the life he had built, was nothing but a facade. His whole existence was tied to something darker, something he had never asked for. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "How do I deal with this truth?" The woman, his sister, took a step forward, her expression softening. "We'll help you, Jake. You don't have to do this alone. We've been waiting for you to be ready. Now that you know the truth, we can protect you. We can teach you how to navigate this world you never knew existed." Jake took a shaky breath. He wasn't sure if he was ready to accept this new reality, but he knew one thing for sure. Everything had changed. The life he had known was gone, replaced by a past he had never imagined. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of a much bigger story, one that would require him to face things he couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the weight of the situation pressed down on him, Jake knew he had no choice but to move forward. He couldn't turn back. The truth had been revealed, and there was no escaping the consequences. This was only the beginning, the unexpected choice. Jake stood still, the air thick with tension as his father and sister waited for him to process everything they had just told him. The past few hours felt like an eternity, and his mind was struggling to keep up with the revelations. His whole life had been a carefully constructed lie, and now the walls of his world were crumbling. He looked at Emma, who had been standing quietly beside him, her face a mirror of confusion and concern. She had always been his rock, the person he could rely on no matter what. But now, even she seemed lost in the storm of questions and emotions that had erupted in his life. She gently squeezed his hand, offering him a silent support. Jake was grateful for her presence, but the weight of the truth was starting to crush him. "What does all of this mean?" he asked, his voice breaking. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" His father stepped forward, his expression grave. "It means that you're not just a regular guy, Jake. You're tied to something much bigger than you ever imagined. Your mother, she was part of a world you don't understand yet. A dangerous world." Jake's mind raced. A dangerous world. His mother had been involved in something like that. He had always seen her as the loving, selfless woman who had raised him alone, sacrificing everything for him. Now that image was shattered. The woman he had loved and trusted had kept the truth from him. She had protected him by keeping him in the dark, but it wasn't enough. His past was about to collide with his future in ways he couldn't yet grasp. "So, what now?" Jake asked, feeling defeated. "Am I supposed to just step into this world? This world you've been hiding from me?" His sister stepped closer, her eyes filled with compassion. "You don't have to do this alone, Jake. We'll guide you. We'll teach you how to survive in this world, how to protect yourself." Jake stared at her, his mind conflicted. He didn't want to be part of this world, but it seemed like there was no escaping it. His mother's choices had already pulled him into the web of secrets and danger, and now it was his turn to face whatever lay ahead. He felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and he had no idea how to play it. "But why now?" Jake asked, his frustration growing. "Why come back after all these years? Why not tell me sooner?" His father's face softened with regret. "We couldn't, Jake. We didn't want to drag you into this. But now that your mother is gone, and the threats are closer than ever, we had no choice but to bring you into the fold." The words hung heavy in the air, and Jake felt his world grow smaller with each passing second. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this kind of life, but it seemed like the choice had already been made for him. His father's mysterious past, his mother's hidden life, and the dark forces lurking on the horizon. Jake could feel the pull of it all, a pull he couldn't ignore. So what happens now? Emma finally spoke up, her voice calm but filled with concern. What's the next step in all of this? Jake looked at her, his heart torn between the life he had known and the new world that was unfolding before him. I don't know, he admitted, but I have to find out. I can't turn my back on it now. His father nodded in approval. That's the right choice. The world you're about to enter is dangerous, but you don't have to face it alone. We'll be with you every step of the way. Jake looked at his sister, then back at Emma. His heart felt heavy with the weight of everything he had just learned. His life was no longer his own. He had been thrust into a battle between truths and lies, between loyalty and betrayal. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. As he took a deep breath, Jake made a decision. He was going to face whatever came next, whether he was ready or not. His future had been rewritten, and he was no longer the man he had been just hours ago. The man who had walked into his wedding day full of hope and excitement was gone. In his place stood a man who had to confront the secrets of his past, the dangers that lay ahead, and the role he had been forced into. This was his new reality, and he would have to fight to survive it. With a final glance at Emma, Jake turned toward his father and sister, ready to take the first step into the unknown. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was no longer afraid. He had no choice but to face the truth, whatever it might be, and he would do it on his own terms. The past was behind him, and the future was waiting. It was time for Jake to embrace his destiny.